Hey there! I have played through Avowed now, and I have a couple of updated thoughts to share. Let's see how many points from my first impression video have survived the playthrough. Let's start with the story. I'm still thinking that Avowed did a decent enough job in presenting their NPCs and companions throughout the campaign. But what changed is that I realized that the game was much less story-focused than I initially thought. During the entire playthrough, I felt like cities became smaller and smaller from one act to the next over the course of the playthrough, and story-rich NPCs got more sparse, and the needed time investment to experience these game aspects got shorter. This was quite the opposite from what I was expecting from an Obsidian first-person RPG, because I guess the points that people will remember when thinking of Outer Worlds or Fallout New Vegas are the interesting NPCs and the unique setting. And while the story itself and what was being told was probably not the most epic story out there, it wasn't completely uninspired. And it's had its moment unfolding itself. The side quest, on the other hand, and the general feel of the cities felt a little bit lifeless and like RPG fast food. So the game definitely has its focus on the exploration side of things. And during the first area, it actually was a good bit of fun to play through that and to uncover every corner. For exploration to feel exciting in games, a couple of things need to come together. First, you need an actual interesting level architecture. You will need points of interest that catch your eye and tell you, sorry, but you have to forget your main quest for a while. I'm here. You need holes and corners that try to hide from your eyes, so you permanently have the feeling of, maybe I'll take another look around that room. And it definitely should feel repetitive. Having to explore the exact same cave over and over isn't exactly exciting. Then there needs to be a link between the actual level and the feeling of risk and reward. If there is no interesting stuff to find, you will start to ignore everything where you know that there is nothing anyway. For example, the Ubisoft games always mastered showing you exactly where you could find everything. And therefore, you did exactly know that every location that was not marked as special was just a backdrop. And over the course of the game, these locations blended into each other, and the only thing one started to see were markers, and not the actual level. Then you need an interesting combat system with lots of ways you can handle encounters and a diverse cast of enemy types that come in different setups. You need ambushes, swarms, strong elite enemies in small arenas, dangerous pathways with traps, and even the common enemy in open areas type that give more of a relaxed feeling have their value, as long as they are not all feel the same. And to spice things up, there should be interesting NPCs, quests, stories, and lore to be found, hidden and waiting for you to be uncovered. So Avowed does not exactly do all of that very well. The thing that I think it does best is actually the level design. There are bridges and waterfalls with hidden areas, small puzzles and locked doors everywhere. Many places have a unique look just from the way the assets are arranged. All in all, it feels pretty well designed. And that's not something every game does well. Starfield. And even with the loot, they did something right. And that is that there is not only generic loot in chests, but also unique weapons and armor, which are only possible to be found in specific places, which give the associated locations meaning, theoretically. Well, at least it would if the entire loot design wouldn't be so unbelievably bad. So there are two things here, the generic loot and the named loot. The named loot is just boring designed. Here 3% more damage reduction on a ring, there elemental accumulation on heavy attack, on it feels like 80% of the weapon. And then there is a generic loot, which are food items which can be transformed into consumables and upgrade materials for your weapon and armor. These things are in every single chest. The upgrade items feel more akin to character upgrade materials in something like Genshin Impact, where you collect everything you can find during your entire playthrough, saving up everything for the moment you will finally have a good weapon at some point, hopefully. At the end of Act 2, I really started to not even realize anymore when opening chests. It didn't matter anymore. It was all the same. And that led to the exploration feeling more and more stretched. At some point, I wished for that they would have just cut the explorable world map in half. There was just too much area to explore for the sake of exploring, and without any relevant items in it to make it feel meaningful or worth it. Then there is the combat. The combat itself is a little bit janky. There are some input issues when there are situations where dodge or walk input doesn't register anymore for a few seconds until you jump. The enemy attacks, your own attacks and your dodge movement cover far too much distance. It wouldn't have to be necessary to always charge 5 meters with every sword swing. Targeting ground markers snap to the environment in a way that they sometimes land somewhere in the area, but not where you want them to be. The Ice Pillar spell is simply not working sometimes. Stuff like that. And while this gives the game a bit of an unpolished feeling, this alone makes the combat not bad. The combat was actually quite enjoyable during Act 1. Problem here is that the feel of the combat never changes, and it gets stale really fast. There are not really a whole lot of enemy types with vastly different tactics and things to look out for, and there are not a lot of combat options in your arsenal so you can make things more interesting. The one thing that surprised me on the positive side is that while the game on Path of the Damned is not really that difficult, it manages to hold its difficulty over the course of the game always in a way that enemies never start feeling completely pointless. And that is something that like 90% of all single-player RPGs, aside from Souls-likes, never manage to nail. In most of these games, you end up so overpowered that combat feels pointless after the first half. The other thing is, and that is probably my personal biggest mood point of the entire game, is what they did with the character build options. The game is made in the universe of the Pillars of Eternity games, which had a truckload of options to build your character. So many classes, powers, items and combinations to choose from. And while it's understandable that this level of customizability gets inside the scope of a first-person RPG nerfed a little bit, they completely reduced it to really just a couple of abilities for 3 basic skill trees. It just feels like they had such a big opportunity to just take a bit of inspiration from the other 2 games and put it in there, but they completely skipped over that. So we end up with an Obsidian RPG with a relatively weak story side and a strong but not very well put together exploration system. For being included in the Game Pass, I still think this game is really not that bad, and you could probably get a couple of enjoyable hours out of it, but just don't expect too much. I could imagine a lot of people losing interest after midway Act 2, but that's still a couple of hours of fun. What do you think, guys? Did you have a different experience with the game? What worked for you and what didn't? I wish you the best, and if you like the content, please subscribe. Have fun and see you later.